did not monitor the GameStop situation. I'd heard about it. Like, I was on Twitter, so I would, like, it would come my way, but, like, I right now would have a hard time explaining it to you, honestly. I don't think I've ever put my money in a stock ever once in my entire life. And so, like, the whole stock market is, like, not a thing that I ever grew up doing. My parents never did it. And so, yeah, it's honestly a thing I have very little understanding of. First, it was Craig Gillespie, who I knew, and I'd worked with on Pam and Tommy, and we had become friends, and I really love his work, and I was a fan of him before. I actually met him, I think I met him when we were making 50-50 as a director after he had made Lars and the Real Girl, I want to say. And so he's just someone I've known for a long time. Lauren and Rebecca, the two writers, are writers that I've known a long time, and we almost directed a movie they wrote many years ago, but it ended up not happening. But they're just people I've been huge fans of for a long time and wanted to work with, and have always loved their writing. And I also love the cast, although I did not interact with pretty much any of them except Nick Offerman, who I do love. And so, like, the cast was also very appealing, even though for the most part I was not working with them. But I got to work with Nick for like an hour or two, so that was nice. I loved the story. I thought the script was really good. It made me understand a thing I never understood before. I mostly think, like, my barometer is like, if this was a movie that was out in the world, would I be excited to go see it? And if I saw the trailer, I'd be like, oh, that looks good. And that's mostly how I make my choices as to what movies I want to be in. And then the role was good, and it was an interesting role, but that was definitely not the draw for me. We find Gabe Plotkin trying to knock down his neighbor's house to build a tennis court for himself. Gabe is someone who is a real guy. First of all, I was at dinner like a month and a half ago with some people, and I mentioned I was in this GameStop movie, and someone was like, oh, I'm friends with Gabe Plotkin. I was like, I play Gabe Plotkin. So he's a real man. He is still very rich, so don't worry about that. You find Gabe, and he's very wealthy, and he works within a system that is definitely rigged for people like him, and it is advantageous to people like him, people who come from wealth, who, people who who have had a life involved in finances and investment and venture capital, and whose friends are all involved in that, and who get all the inside information on it, and who have been trained in the convoluted systems involved in that world. And he's very comfortable and very wealthy, and worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and then as the movie unfolds, he finds that there's like a group of people who have used social media and the internet to kind of like hack the system that he was really, doing very well off of, and that he really thought he had like a pretty stable understanding of, and they disrupted that. Because of social media, these people found a way to take the system that Gabe Plotkin was really benefiting from, and they disrupted it. These people are human, and like, do I find myself sympathizing with him particularly? No, if I'm being honest, like a little bit. Like, no one wants to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, but like when you still have hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not that bad, And so it's like, but at the same time, I think there's like an archness often kind of projected onto people like Gabe Plotkin, and their actions are evil, but in my opinion, in almost a more evil way. They don't necessarily even like view it that way or think about it. And they're like normal family people who are like making hundreds of millions of dollars off of like the collapse of institutions and companies and people failing, you know what I mean? And I find that odd from a moral standpoint, if I'm being honest, and it's not something I would do with my money, but yeah, and many people find it objectively bad, but the truth is the day-to-day life of this guy is like, he wakes up, he makes breakfast for his kids. It's almost worse in a way because he's not that invested in it. Like, he knows he'll be fine, really. And again, it'll ruin his day, week, month, year, maybe, but it won't ruin his life. But he is benefiting off of things that are ruining people's lives, you know? And to me, that is interesting. And I always think it's like, you know, it's honestly like something I'm aware of is how sympathetic I'm making the characters I play, because I just know that that audiences like me and that they kind of root for me. And I think it makes doing roles like this interesting because, you know, it does humanize these people in some way, but at the same time, I try not to project too much depth onto people like this. Like, I think inherently, if you were around these people, they're probably sympathetic in some ways, but I don't think they're particularly deep thinkers in like a global, you know, in like a moral way, you know. And I think that is where their shortcomings are, is that they either don't. I think like the bad version is they really know what they're doing and they just don't care. But I think the more likely version is they just haven't put that much thought into it. Yeah, he wanted Gabe to be someone who you kind of seemed like a normal, understandable guy and was not too evil or too angry or too, you know, like, again, too arch. Like, it was, yeah, like an exercise in making him seem very real and to portray what he was going through probably as it was, which again, for him were probably not great days, but in the grand scale of like bad things happening to people on Earth, it's fine what happened to him. And it's like not something anyone should lose any sleep over other than him. My character had invested tons of money in shorting GameStop stocks, which is essentially betting on the company's failure, and profiting off of it. And Roaring Kitty found a way to boost the value of the company by imploring people to buy its stock, which made the people like Gabe, who invested in the company's failure, in a very financially catastrophic situation, because they had essentially made huge bets that the companies were going to fail. And even though technically they are failing, what tells the world if a company is failing or not, and on paper what makes a company fail or not, is whether or not people are buying stock in it and whether or not it's valued by people. And because people started buying stock in it, even though people weren't, you know, buying tons of video games at GameStop, the company went up in value and people like Gabe lost tons of money. My character is kind of like a junior billionaire in a world of bigger billionaires, you know, and I actually think like the biggest failure for these people is to look like they made bad bets and to have to be bailed out, basically, and to have to admit, like, I'm not a financial genius. I need more money. I made the wrong choice. And I think, and Steve Cohen is just like a horrible man who like gets joy from seeing those around him fail and from finding ways to use that to his advantage and to own a piece of those people and to like dig his heel into them and as close friends, I think, as it seems like Gabe and Steve Cohen are, Steve Cohen's more than happy to kind of rub salt in Gabe's wounds and do what he does, which is ultimately like kind of leech off the life force of others. I think Gabe and Ken are competitive, but it's the same thing where like I think Ken pretends to be Gabe's friend knowing that like this is a guy I will ultimately be able to take advantage of one day and be able to kind of own a piece of his soul one day, because he's a young, sort of naive but smart and successful guy who is not like the meanest shark in the tank by any means. So I think when people who are around guys like that are like, oh, I'll become friends with this guy, and then when the time comes, I will take advantage of him. It was so funny filming with Nick, because the last thing we filmed together was Pam and Tommy, where we play like disgusting like porno producers essentially, and all the scenes we have together are like the most like low life like skeevy scenes like you could ever find yourself in. And then we didn't see each other for like a year, and like we show up at like a country club and we're wearing our tennis whites and we're clean cut and looking fresh. What's funny is neither of us know how to play tennis, and we both took tennis lessons. And ultimately that was like a pretty funny day of shooting, because it was pretty embarrassing, like for the two of us to act like we knew how to play tennis. I think ultimately we got enough material, but we were laughing pretty hard, I have to say. What's interesting about how the movie was shot is it's kind of like everyone was the star of their own little movie, and that is really different and interesting. And like when I was shooting, I was the only actor there a lot of the time, and I was like number one on my little call sheet. And I'm sure when Paul was shooting, he was number one on his little call sheet, and I'm sure when Vincent was shooting, he was number one on his call sheet. You know, and it was like a really interesting thing that I've never really experienced before, where it was kind of all these like little, you know, it's bouncing around in the movie. It's so fast and seamless that it kind of, you know, it even fools me into thinking it's kind of playing out simultaneously, but they're each shot in a super compartmentalized way, you know? And so, yeah, it's funny. I've talked to a few of the other actors, and everyone kind of feels like they're the star of the movie in some ways, because when they were shooting, they were the star of the movie. The whole movie was about them, you know? It's funny. But we all are the stars of the movie, except Paul Dano. He's mostly the star of the movie. I think it's funny. I think things that have like energy and adrenaline and humor and are exciting for people to see. I think every movie's better in theater. There's no movie that's not better for theater for one main reason: it makes you not look at your fucking cell phone for the duration of the film. And I'd say 90% of people at home are watching movies scrolling on their fucking phones, and when you're in a movie theater, you're not allowed to do that. And so everyone should see a movie in a theater, if for no other reason, it forces you to not look at your fucking telephone for the duration of the film. I don't know, maybe, yeah, I'd ask him what it was like. I mean, generic questions, small talk, chit-chat. There's nothing I'm particularly interested in knowing, if I'm being honest, but I'd be curious to see what it was like from his perspective. But I'd ask him a few questions. But if someone also told me like there's Gabe Plotkin, I wouldn't necessarily go over and talk to him. I might be like, yo, let's get out of here. Let's not talk to him. My brother-in-law works in finance, and I know a lot of people, and I've known him for almost 20 years. I know a lot of people work in finance, people I grew up with. To me, it's funny, because whenever I ask someone who works in finance, like, what do you do? It's like my brain is incapable of processing it. It's like sand through your fingers. I just don't get it. And I can't get it. And then after making this movie, I kind of start to realize, like, that's on purpose to some degree. Like, it is a purposely convoluted and complicated system that allows people to make money in very weird ways if you understand the intricacies of this convoluted system. And so many people don't, but still put their money into it to the pure advantage of the people who do understand it better than they do. And this is one of the rare examples where like that system was kind of figured out by other people, and whereas money was kind of like the price of admission into understanding that system to some degree, it became like a social following became the price of admission for being able to influence that system and profit off it. And I think that to me, that was really interesting. Dumb money to them was like day traders, like making money, day traders, like essentially trying to do anything that was against the systems that they had put in place, like buying up a stock they were shorting. If it was institutionally understood that shorting that stock was a smart idea, then day traders trying to pull some maneuver to them was just stupid people giving them more money, basically.